the world is going, labor markets and connections between people are going, and just it's such an interesting time, I think, to be doing what it is that you're doing, and to do it well, with respect, with really keeping the well-being of people in mind is so good. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Pam. And the talk we are having today is all about you, and we want to bring you all the way back when you were young, and we would like to understand when you were young, what did you dream one day you're gonna become, and have you ever thought of one day you're gonna do this kind of job and write this kind of book, got this kind of awards and things like that, and so I think that a lot of us we always undermine our ability, right? So we want to hear stories from the like you, the real story of what you've been doing, and so it will be fun, Pam. Okay.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, maybe starting a little bit with being younger. So is that, I will follow your lead in
Sure.
terms of the kind of
So
questions that you think are relevant. And it's always good to have a conversation, right? For me to
yeah.
learn about you and you about me. But growing up, I grew up in Marin County, California, which is across the Golden Gate Bridge from San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was in the 1970s. I'm 55, so I was born in 66, the year of the fire horse, and in the Chinese New Year. And so I really had one of these childhoods of being very independent. I loved school. I really didn't have a big sense of the rest of the world.
Mm.
But was very connected always with the environment. My parents actually divorced when I was quite young, when I was 5, and at the time my dad was mayor of my town, so that was interesting. Of just my early days was spending very connected with watching my dad really be involved in local town, which is important now for the work that I do.
Mm.
But probably the biggest thing that I always saw, both with my mom and my dad, growing up, was a very big passion for the environment. My dad was very active, and he created the first curbside recycling program in the state of California in 1971.
Wow.
I remember a little girl walking with him on different hills. He was always thinking about ways to be protecting the environment, to be protecting the earth. So my dad is more the active person who was a community builder, who was always doing projects to get people involved. And my mom is more really somebody who just loved the outdoors, loved being a parent. Just really she always says, her favorite spiritual place is just out on a hiking trail. Oh. And in fact, she's 87 years old, and she still does at least one 10-mile hike a week.
Wow.
Today. So it's just I always watched that with my parents. So that, the early days, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I ended up deciding to be an exchange student my senior year of high school. And that was the thing that just completely opened my mind to the rest of the world. Being in Switzerland, there were students from all over the world. Mm. I learned my first language, which was French. And it just really opened me up to so many things and got me excited about going down that path. So my journey ended up in the early days in college being international studies focused. International development, community development was my major. Mm. I lived in Mexico my sophomore year. I lived in Colombia, South America my senior year. And then I lived in Brazil after that, training capoeira, which is an Afro-Brazilian martial art that I was active in studying. So I had a whole series of time in which I was very adventurous, and I learned French and Spanish and Portuguese, and had a great time traveling. So that kind of was the early formative years of my work.
I also remember that you had the black belt for mixed martial art on 2014, right?
Yes, I did that. That came later. So I did capoeira in my 20s, from 20 to about 31. And then I did, when my son decided to take class when I was in my 40s, I went into class, I went into the martial arts school, and I just got this really strong feeling of like, oh my gosh, it feels so good to be back in here. So I just started to train myself in the adult class as he was doing the kids class. And then he actually quit. He ended up going and playing another sport. And I stayed. I stayed about 5 years, and I went all the way through to get my black belt. It was one of those things. Capoeira in the Brazilian martial art, it is a long path. And so it might be 20, 25 years to get to the top level. And so it just was that was not really the path, that I was meant to do. But there was more of a rigor in, the first level for a 40-something person in, getting a black belt. I know it's not going to be the same kind of skill that somebody who's 25 has, right? But I love that rigorous path of really progressing through. And it was very challenging. I mean, it was something that pushed me in such a good way to my learning edges, for sure. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the fact that I did that.
Pam, look at this way: when you in your last year of high school, and then you got exchange program in Switzerland, right? And it's looked like the world has been unpacked for you since then, with a lot of amazing things that you do. And so after school, how did your career all started?
In the early days, I found out pretty much when I was doing my final studies in university in Colombia, especially, that I was doing a project, an internship. It just didn't feel right to me, based on my philosophy, what we were studying, to be an expatriate aid worker, especially a young white woman being in a country of, having folks who were so deeply immersed in what they needed within their own community. It was like part of the early stages of what's driven a lot of my views about community development, that it's not so much a top down where you have somebody from a different place that comes into a system and tries to tell people what to do, but rather to figure out what are obstacles that are in people's way and what's a way to really work to remove those obstacles while building their own capacity. So in Bogota, I was working in a program that was teaching some of the women from the area, which was on the outskirts of the city, how to be teachers, because they really wanted to be teaching within their own communities. So that just led me in the early days of my career away from wanting to do expatriate aid work around the world, and more to put a focus on doing nonprofit work. I did, worked at a foundation, community foundation, worked at a art and science museum, and then I found myself into the field of training and development, which really has now been a over 30-year love. It interestingly combines some of the models. When you look at organizational systems, it's very similar to systems you look at for economic development. And I know a big thread in my own work is always been helping to take people on a transformational journey of growth so that they feel better and stronger and more capable. And that's work that I did for many years, first internally inside companies as the director of training and development at BlackRock, which is now called, it was Barclays Global Investors when I was there, but then led me to the first 10 years of my business, starting in 1996, which was 10 years as a management consultant, working independently in companies in Silicon Valley and then other places.
And that is a company that you founded up until now, right?
Yes.
I met a lot of executives in my life, and when they at the retiring age time, right, they always told me that that if that's two things that if they could change. The first thing is that they can start their own companies when they were young and still can do that, in which you did. The second one is writing a book on themselves, because there's so much things that they've been learning, is accumulated. But then so every conversation like that, I always told them that that's not too late. We can always charge take course and change into gain. And so with that being said, we would like to bring you back to when you were at Barclays and doing the works at the director of training and development, right? And working for corporate absolutely has a lot of boundary, rules, procedure, and policy, but also has a lot of securities in there that stop a lot of us to making a leap of faith and start doing our own thing. So what made you, Pam, in that safe environment, decided to go into the to the uncertainty water out there to start your own organization, though?
I think first, safety, I mean, beyond physical safety, but is not really a huge top of priority for me.
Mm.
When I think of my top values, I actually have a huge tolerance for risk. I love learning. I love adventure. I love growth, innovation. And so I actually had a wonderful time when I was especially within Barclays Global Investors. I had a fantastic team. I learned so much. And it's funny, as we'll talk about a little later, I ended up writing a book about leaving corporate, but I am not the person who says that it was totally terrible at all. I love the work that I did. I learned so much from the different folks that I worked with about things that I hadn't been familiar about before, learning all about trading and investing, and it was so invigorating. For me, what ended up happening is I had been the volunteer executive director for this capoeira group, for this martial art group. So by day, I was doing my day job, which was very busy. And then at night, I would teach classes. The weekends, I would be often, we created a youth group that we ended up having about 250 youth that were in our programs with lots of partnerships. I created 27 different partnerships with youth organizations in the neighborhoods in San Francisco. So there's a lot of work to do, which was a great joy for me at the time. I didn't have a family, didn't have kids. And so that was very exciting. But at a certain point, I was doing 17 classes a week. So you can imagine, in addition to working a full-time job, so it eventually caught up with me. And I turned 30. I got pneumonia. So for the first time, I think my body just shut down. And that's where I said, we went through an acquisition. And so my very beloved leadership team left to different companies. And that's where I just said, I think it's time for me to try something new. I actually quit without a plan. I did not quit planning on working for myself. I started working for myself after looking around at different jobs and just not finding anything that was really compelling. And my former manager had moved to Hewlett Packard. And so that's where I first started doing a contract project with her. And then that's where everything came together, because I realized all this volunteer work I had done with the martial art organization was very entrepreneurial. I grew the program, I wrote grants, I was doing marketing. And so everything came together, and I realized I always had a love for the work I did in training and development. But if I could do it independently, with more freedom and flexibility and adventure, then that was the best of all things. So it didn't, like I tell many of my clients, and I've told them over the years, it's so dangerous just to follow one person's path. If I were just to write a book saying, it's fine, work until you don't like it, quit without a plan, you'll immediately get clients and make more money than you did in corporate. Like, that's what happened to me. But that's very specifically because of my personality, because of relationships that I had, and I think experience that I had. It could be very different for somebody who values security. And I know many people and many of my clients who have very different risk tolerance than I do.
And maybe is that something that leading you to write the book, the second book, the body that works?
Yes. So the first book, after I did management consulting for about 10 years, I was finding, especially toward the end, that just there were many people who were not happy in corporate and had the same feeling as some of your clients and that you've talked about, where they really wanted to leave but didn't know how. So that was my first job. My first book was Escape from Cubicle Nation, that came out of a blog that I wrote to really help people to make that transition with a solid financial foundation. I did a lot of that early stage startup work of getting a lot of folks moving in profitable businesses for many years. And then I found that there was a limited way that we were really looking at the world of work. And so Body of Work came out in 2014. So there was disruption, not quite the same amount we find today, but it felt very limited that we were still looking at career paths as either doing corporate or entrepreneurship, because I found many people would move among and between those work modes, or they might work at a university or start a nonprofit or work at a smaller firm. And so I thought, what's a way we can create a framework that would allow somebody moving through their career to have a sense of cohesion and have a method that could follow them throughout their whole career. So I looked to people like artists and photographers and writers that we well understand have bodies of work that can evolve and change over time and go through stages of growth. And that's really where body of work came, is a way to look at what we do in a coherent way. And I call it a love letter to creation, because it really is being very deliberate about how we spend our time and what we create through our work.
It's amazing to see when you work, there's a lot of dot that you put out there, and then when all the dot actually reconnecting to back all together. And each books that you wrote actually was advanced, a lot advanced, that leading to change later on, in the way that I see. Yeah, in 2009 you talk about the escape the typical nation, right? And then now we
Yes.
had the great resignations everywhere, and people starting to, and if business leaders actually thought of the culture they created in advance before, and instead of making the cubicle nation like it is, right, but it breaking it into a environment culture where employees can find where they belong and things like that, things might have changed differently a lot, and yeah.
Yes, it's really true. I just did a talk about a week and a half ago in Philadelphia to technology partners. It was called Supernode, and it was a conference put on by the company Crossbeam, which is in Philadelphia. And so their unique purpose is really to help facilitate collaboration and partnerships between different technology companies, which, as you know well, and I think you model well in your work, that's really the way often that we look at growth these days, is what are ways you can get a suite of services from different companies that you might be offering for your clients. A lot of, especially SaaS companies, software as a service companies, are doing co-marketing, partnering together. So I was talking to them about teasing a little bit that I do feel sometimes like I have a crystal ball looking into the future, because it's a blessing and it's a curse sometimes, because it is, I can't really describe it, but I've just started to understand it. And, at this point now, 26 years in, there are certain things that I can see based on patterns where I notice maybe an awareness or a change that organizations need to make far before they need to make it. And so it's like anybody who's ever doing more of that strategic, future-focused work, in the early days, I think you spend a lot of time trying to make the case, sharing. Some people really get it. And then sometimes it takes like a really significant change for people to look around and, say, oh my gosh, and of course they're like, why didn't anybody tell us? And I'm sitting here going, I've been telling you this since 2009. So it's one of the contributions that I hope that I do make to the world of work is just maybe raising awareness and bringing some frameworks for us to think about. There's always going to be people who are doing some of that early stage, early adopter work, because of course, not everybody is going to immediately run into change. But I do think that we need to pay attention to the kinds of signs. And I know in a lot of the more, old school corporate culture of that, which I saw within my, my dad's company or older companies like that, there just was a very different way of, more command and control. And as much as things have changed and we try to bring things through, understandably, I think a lot of leaders still feel a little bit lost, knowing how to be more of this leader as partner, like really recognize that we need to be in partnership with our employees. Each partner needs to come with an understanding that they're not the only person in town, right? That employees have many opportunities. Some of them may have aspirations to be doing side hustle projects or doing other things. And if we can have honest and open conversations about it and really help each other to grow in the direction we want to grow, in my experience, it ends up where you do create passionate collaborators. So somebody might work in your company as an employee for a few years. If you're not threatening them, that if they leave, something bad's going to happen. If you are open, you have, conversations and know where they want to go, they might go and found a startup that later on could lead you and your company to an opportunity that you wouldn't have had.
Yep.
But in order to do that, you need to really have a different way, I think, that you're communicating together. And it's hard. It requires us to be more vulnerable, and it requires to be less certain. It requires us to think sometimes in shorter term. It's not, I don't know what your experience is, in Vietnam or other places where you've worked, but the contract in terms of how long that people are willing to stay at one company just seems to be shrinking more and more.
Mm-hmm.
So frustrating when you're constantly hiring and turning over staff.
It's surprisingly, like in my country, the turnover, from like from staff from one country to the next has been shrinking to 2 years time frame now. But then, if you look at the Western companies and corporate America back then, when in the in 20 years ago, people stay for 10 years, 15 years, and things like that a lot, right? My organization, like we used to have people at the decor that work for the organization for 35 years, for 32 years. And Singapore office, the average staff that works there since 2015, and before that, it was about 20 years in average, from the senior leaders to the new entrant. But then now, with all the changes, that rate drop all the ways, average about 7 years, and expecting it to continue to and to shorten. So I think there's it's a sign that the behavior of employers change a lot, and the opportunities out there actually are abundant for the employees to either pursue, like you say, becoming entrepreneurs, or going to another companies where the culture is actually can promote them for passions, for opportunity of learning and growing, right? And Pam, how could you see these things in advance like that?
I honestly can't really describe it.
Mm,
Sometimes it could be somebody who's really good at math, which is not me. might just say, I don't know why, but I've never had trouble when a teacher puts a math problem on the board of solving it.
mm,
I feel like for me, a combination of ways that I'm wired. I think having a big picture strategic focus
mm,
is very a core part of the way that I see the world. I definitely tend to think in systems, and my work is centered on the human side of business, of really understanding the behavior of humans, looking at relationships that we have, and just really enjoying having the truly heartfelt kinds of conversations
mm,
about the truth that's happening in people's lives. And so it really was, for many years when I was a consultant to larger companies, I would have those conversations, those confidential conversations where, of course, in a public setting, everybody is saying, I'm fine, everything is okay. But then as we had a moment, maybe after an event, to sit quietly and talk to each other, is where somebody might say, I'm actually extremely unhappy. I feel really terrified, or my manager is, I really don't like them, but I don't know what to do. I remember having a deep, beautiful conversation with somebody when I was working in a large company, who said, I just have this hunger to go home. He was from West Africa, and he said, I'm here, and I feel like I should be happy that I'm here in this amazing position of privilege, but I just long for home. All these really powerful personal stories. And
mm,
so that's part of it, I think. It's being privy to actually what's happening and what's on people's minds,
mm,
and hearing then, for many years after as a coach, what it is that people are saying and the truth of their experience. I know that that feeds a lot. My understanding of what's happening is just having so many conversations with people that are very heartfelt, is deeply understanding what are the kinds of barriers that people have, what are people thinking and talking about. And I think that, coupled with being the kind of person who's just always curious about problem solving and looking at patterns of people who are working, in different areas, that's informed the work that I've done for my latest book, The Widest Net.
mm,
I think that just kind of adds up. I mean, I am not saying, of course, I wouldn't bet money on myself if I were a gambling person, to say I can predict what the housing market is going to be like in 2032 or something. But I do feel pretty confident, based on my experience over the last 3 decades, of
mm,
noticing the kinds of trends that are going to happen and then generally seeing them come true.
mm. I think that also there's a lot of level of deep thinking that you put onto servicing the people around you, and
Yeah.
that level of deep thinking that enables you to dive in a lot more into beyond the curiosity, but know the curiosity of curiosity also. So that leads to this question that every time I met, and like expert like you are, and I always like to ask, how do you think? And the reason for that is, there's a lot of us out there that not learning how to think properly. And my wife and I are in the pursuit of helping people to understanding how we can shape our thinking in a better directions. And one of the way to do that is to ask expert, how Pamela, and schedule your time in the day to think, and what process you put out to help you think deeper in any situations. You share that with us?
Absolutely. So I will totally share my own view of how it is that I do it. And
Mm-hmm.
then I think I will share a view as a coach
Yes.
about ways that individuals can look at it. Because part of what I've come to understand over time is really looking at my own work through a strengths-based approach. So
Mm.
really noticing the kinds of things that I do well and leaning into those areas as much as possible. So really choosing the kind of work that I can do that is, interesting to me, and very specifically working on problems that are really interesting to me.
Mm.
And that's just important for the way that I'm wired, that naturally leads me down a path of curiosity. I have many friends who are authors who book writing, for example, more from the perspective of a journalist. And in lots of conversations with Dan, I know that he might approach a particular piece of work or book like that where he's really doing lots of research and exploring a topic and spending all his days writing about it. For me, all the thinking really comes in the context of the work that I'm doing. So I'm really an author practitioner. I'm paying close attention to what it is that people are struggling with. And then I process often a either like reflection on patterns that I'm seeing, or some kind of helpful tool for what it is that they are working on through writing. And so for many years, since 2005, I've always had a blog. That's like the early way that I start to work things out, or I have an idea, or I notice that in many coaching conversations, I keep talking about a concept. And so when I talk about it enough, then I say to myself, all right, now I need to write about it, because that's a way that I can actually make a coherent picture. I can create something that I can be sharing one to many with other people. And then usually through that trail of different pieces of content is where I begin to see or even feel the shape of a book, because a book is that deeper structure in which usually I am looking at a core problem or challenge that is bigger than just a single piece of content. And then that's when I start to work on and shape what's the idea for the book. And then based on what the structure is, generally I like to have structures where I have stories of real people or some kind of way to bring somebody into a concept. I have lots of frameworks. We have, my husband and I have a learning lab here in Mesa, Arizona. And so we have a gigantic board. I'm pointing behind me for anybody watching the video. In the room behind me, we have a huge wall that's all whiteboard. So I spend a lot of time whiteboarding, diagramming things out, working on concepts visually. And I do the same thing if I'm on calls with my iPad. So I use my iPad and a pen. And that's the way that I can begin to get the models together. So it's usually together. And when I think about the optimum situation for me, if I'm thinking effectively, I also have lots of free space
Free space.
in order to like relax, think, actually just like let my thoughts percolate a little bit. Not to be constantly working or writing is something that works for me. So I tend to work in like almost seasons or phases depending upon what I'm doing. The coach part of me in addressing that question just says, in my experience working with people, all kinds of different people that are wired differently, that come from different values, perspectives, different backgrounds, I always highly encourage my clients to really pay attention to how they are uniquely wired. What are those patterns and habits that really fit with them? So some people like me are much more creative, almost the artistic part where they see it's like doing a painting with ideas. Whereas I know other people who are much more methodical, more of an engineering approach where they might methodically, slowly, day by day work on something. And I know if we were to try to switch the way that we thought, it probably would create a lot of pain and discord because we're out of our natural way that we think. So that's always my encouragement. I, like you, get super inspired by hearing ideas about how people might optimize their work, and it often really inspires me. But I have created pain and suffering for myself when I might try to compare myself to somebody else. Like, why can't I be as disciplined as Dan Pink when I'm writing? And over the years, I've just learned because I'm not him. And he's not me, and that's okay. We both somehow end up with books that sell a few more million copies and hit the New York Times list, but that's okay.
Thanks for sharing that, Pam. Which lead me to this question about. I'm sorry. In 2021, you introduced the book, The Widest Net, right? And what is that book about? And I'm excited that it's going to be, translated into Vietnamese for our readers here. So, can you tell us for our audience?
Yes, I'm super excited. Our first foreign translation will be in Vietnamese, which makes me very happy. So the widest net, if we really look at the path of the books, Escape from Cubicle Nation helped people who wanted to leave to start a business to basically make a safe exit in their first starting business so that they were really financially stable, but working independently. Body of Work looks more specifically really at what is that very specific body of work you want to build and create. Is often where people go through iterations of their business, where they're really honing their business model, making sure what they're creating has big value. As soon as people do that and they say, yes, I have an idea, I know exactly what I want to do, always the question that comes up is, where's my audience? Or where are my clients? Or where is my community? And so the widest net is a very specific step-by-step method for how it is that you can build a business, build a community, build an audience that is based on the framework of ecosystems. And what that means is you center your ideal client. So if somebody has, an ideal client they want to reach, and then in my model, I have an ecosystem with different segments you can look to with people, companies, service providers, media hubs that are already providing information, resources, and tools to that same customer. And my hypothesis in the book is, which has been proven out by so much of my client work, my own work, is when you do that, it's actually a much easier way to get one-to-many clients and customers, rather than if you're just trying to pull every individual person into you. It's what I call the empire culture versus the ecosystem culture. We talk, at least in US-based businesses sometimes, about building an empire. And personally, for my values, that doesn't really resonate because empires were really great for a few people at the top. They usually aren't that great for most other people. So it's a bit of a strange metaphor in this world today of Web 3.0 and so much more distribution and collaboration. An ecosystem, there are ways we can identify the perfect partners, people who we can work with, places we can strategically connect, so that together we're all really solving the problem of our ideal client and customer. I know, as an example, in my own work as a business coach, every single day I work with intellectual property attorneys, CPAs, web designers, all these other service providers that my clients need to scale business. I also work with software as a service companies that provide tools to help my clients grow. And sometimes I work with government initiatives who are doing work around entrepreneur development, or work with universities that have programs around entrepreneurship. So that's really the core idea for the widest net, is a way to more quickly and easily understand your market, and then to strategically connect with the very best partners. I think it's a more effective and stronger way to grow a business.
Wow. I think that is important, especially in the business to business world today. Instead of going out to so many sources out there, prospects out there, but to focus on the core strategic clients and build the ecosystem around them, understand the ecosystem around that particular clients, and serve that market well in order to you continue to expand the spiral web to the next group of customers. Right? Pam, how did you think of that idea at the beginning, though?
This is really based on the earliest roots, as I was talking about the journey of my own studies. In the models I studied as a teenager, really as an 18-year-old when I was in college, around models of economic development. Everything was about systems thinking, looking at the ways, all the different factors that were impacting the emotional well-being and the social well-being of people in communities. So that model is one that was always so interesting to me. And then through the work that I did, the many years I spent building online communities when I had my blog, that was, using those same kind of principles. And for me, it really was more organic. I look at the world that way, and I had no idea that that's what I was doing, is beginning to create a model. But the more that I began to look at it, codify it, and write about it, as I said before, and notice the patterns, is where I was like, wait a minute, there is always a way in which I'm putting this together for my clients. And it is a model that it works, regardless if you might say, I want to hire more Vietnamese software engineers. Usually the first thing that I would do is say, okay, who are the people who are training those engineers? Who are companies that might have them? Who are associations that, that might be made up of Vietnamese software engineers? So right away, you just notice that there's this way to look at the, quickest way in which you can be building community and building a strategic network. And it was one of those things where I just ended up feeling compelled to be writing about it. I think another important part of my work is, by personality, I'm not necessarily one who's always going to be like spending most of my time critiquing what I see, but there are some really problematic things that I've seen. And through the conversations I've had with business owners, with very transactional approaches to business, very often customers don't feel good. They feel like a number. Very often entrepreneurs who are highly relational by the way they're wired don't like it when I might say, okay, if you want to be successful, you just need to pound out the emails, and it doesn't matter, as long as you get the right conversion rate, you don't need to worry about people. Like, just focus on the dollars. Actually, it's quite a bit of a dehumanizing way to operate. And I think that it's really harming us a lot in societies and our relationships with each other. I hope in Vietnam you are not as fractured as we are in the United States. I feel actually a sense of embarrassment in many ways for the state that we are in. Pretty much every single social contract we have with each other, our connection and community, our political structure, our economy, there are so many parts in which we are so deeply fragmented from each other. And so to me, the more we can bring a depth of understanding, deep listening, a strategic view of really collaboration, win-win, that's what we need to do actually quite a bit of healing and with each other. And also just to make sure that we're creating an environment in which there don't have to be winners and losers, or just, people on top are just lucky and then everybody else just has to struggle. I think that's a choice, and it's not a choice that I want to demonstrate to my kids.
Yep. Thanks first for doing that. I am actually working on the book called Teamsization. So it's a teams of organization, and I don't know how to put any other words instead of put teams and organizers and cut half of the organization, so become teamization. And the fundamental of that is also the same, because when I started my own organization, right, I started to leverage the network that we have, the supplier that supply printing machine to a company can be a big source of introduce us to a client, right? And attorney office also is a big source of introduce us to a new to the new client that enter into Vietnam and looking for the services. And then we can do the same, because our clients, we someday need services from these professional services, and then we can also introduce backward, and then it's the matter of who we choose to be in our network, what values we share together, and where we can build a common understanding and agreement, so that we're not gonna, and each of us honors the agreement that we have. So it takes a lot. I'm still in the early stage of writing that, so thanks for sharing the idea of the book. I would definitely looking forward to read the what is next, to learn from the expert like you are. um, so now you've been writing the book about helping people to get out of the corporate world and doing their own business. Another book is about building the roots, the foundation for them, so that they can serve their clients. Now it's the book for finding clients that they can serve, right?
Yes.
What's next, Pam? So is there anything exciting that you're about to do that you want to share with us in advance, so that we can celebrate with you now?
I feel it. Well, for sure. The thing I'm probably most excited about now that the book is done
Mm,
is for bringing it out into the world and often really finding the use cases. One of the most fun things as an author is to notice that there are places you wouldn't imagine that might relate to a model that you create, that might use it in new and interesting ways.
mm,
And so just today I had an email from a friend that has a marketing agency, and I had spoken at their conference a week ago. And so he said, is it okay if we're use the model? They're a marketing agency and they do a lot of work around content. And he said, would it be okay if we use this ecosystem model part of your book in our work? And I said, yes, absolutely. It's so neat to see where they might identify this as being a piece of what would be important in their work. The other thing is, like I mentioned before, in this technology partnerships and
mm,
ecosystems, where they've actually been in that world for a long time.
mm,
SaaS companies have been talking about ecosystem development for a long time. I had a conversation yesterday with folks who are creating a company that really helps to create tools to enable very smooth um, two-way flowing of information for technology partnerships and ecosystems. So that's always so interesting to see the ways in which the work goes out there.
mm,
And then for me personally, as it relates to my business, finding the areas where I say, what can I just do to inspire other people where they can be using the work in their field? And then what are things I can do to actually be moving it forward?
mm,
So I know a lot of work I'm doing these days with clients is more in helping them to scale through intellectual property. So to do things like building licensing and certification programs, to really look for ways to amplify and grow as they find new markets, to have ways they can be translating their IP to let it grow.
mm.
And then I think, with some of the work also, probably because I have had such a deep insight into the workplace, I think there's certain kinds of training programs that would be really fun to be partnering with larger companies on, to maybe train people in the frameworks of body of work or in the widest net of ways in which they can network that can feel effective and that really relate to the world as it is today. So we're always exploring with my team ways to grow. This time, usually I have a long time between books because it takes a lot of incubation, but for some reason what whispered in my ear very early on, almost as soon as the widest net came out, is I think the next book is going to be more about leadership, but very specifically more just personal leadership, like how it is that you navigate the world of work from that context of really wanting to be a leader that makes ethical decisions.
Mm,
And I find that's where all the conversations are going with my clients.
mm.
And I am not going to write it at least for a year, but it feels like it is probably part of this overall set of books of, once you have all these opportunities, how do you really discern how you're going to weave through that
Yep.
and do it in a way that makes you proud of your choices
Mm.
and really effective in what you're doing.
Wow. Wow. We will look forward for that books to come. Okay. And then once you have an idea, you have the way to work it out and get it out to the market. Because there's people out there that needs to. There's a lot of books about leaderships already, but each book is like a unique, like way of introducing your point of view, your experience, your belief in leadership for other people. So the more that we can read from different people opinions, the more that we can think what we can, find the best option for us, right? Pam, I have the last question for you today, and before I say that, before I ask that question, congratulations on all the great things that you've been doing. Not a lot of people can do in this world, and then you've been doing that. You've been role model for a lot of us. So thanks for doing that, and we wish you all the best so that you can continue to introduce more to the world. Okay.
I very much appreciate that. Thank you.
My last question for you is a personal questions that I always like to ask, because in your networks you have a lot of amazing people. Like you have Susan Cain, you have Daniel Pings, you have Benny Brown, a lot of people that I personally admire their works also. And how did you connect with them and build that relationship, a healthy one, up until now and heading to the future? Can you share?
Absolutely. So it's this. I think it's an example of what I noticed that was part of what it is that I wanted to write about in The Widest Net. My natural inclination with a lens on whatever is that part of my body of work that I'm building. So like in the days when I was doing Escape from Cubicle Nation, I'm always on the search for people who are the smartest, most interesting, that are doing, like, have really deep experts, that have interesting tools that I can be bringing to my clients or my audience, my readers. And through that pursuit, there really is this, for me, it's a natural interest of like being drawn to the work. Guy Kawasaki is another person who I've known for so many years, who I'm very proud now, to call a friend, but was somebody who I still just admire so greatly for what he does. But like in the early days, my driving force was not, oh my gosh, he's famous, I should connect with him so that it opens up opportunities. It was that I love the way that he's talking about branding. That's so interesting. It makes me want to know him more. And so that's the way always that my connection with people starts out. And a lot of what I talk about in The Widest Net, the process that you have for taking the time to respectfully get to know somebody. The first time I met Dan, I loved his books from early on. Free Agent Nation in the early days was so inspirational. Work he did in the magazine Fast Company just felt revolutionary to me early on. And so I followed his work for a long time. I think there was a first time I might have met him at a live event, and like everybody else, I stood in a long line, and then I went, and when I was able to shake his hand, I shook his hand, smiled, probably took a picture, had him sign a book. But that was an example of a first point of connection. And then maybe a little bit later, I would put comments on something that he put on social media. And then, later, maybe there was somebody I knew who knew him, where I might, reach out through his website and send a message with some encouraging information. One of the things I've learned when people are famous, often for a reason, because they have an amazing body of work, but they also have many people coming at them, is actually something that Guy Kawasaki shared. He had been instrumental in really opening up my audience for my blog and Escape from Cubicle Nation. And I had written a post that I thought he might like. I didn't know him at all. I reached out to send him an email one night just saying, I love your work. I thought you might like this. He ended up sharing that the next day on his blog, and it went tremendously viral. And so we had fun through the week after that, like emailing, and I was telling him what was going on. And it was that was kind of a fun point of connection. Eventually, through really maybe about 18 months after that, is when I ended up getting a book deal for the book Escape from Cubicle Nation. So he and I were on a panel together at a conference at South by Southwest, which is in Austin, Texas. And he said the question of how do you catch the eye of somebody who's really an influencer? And he said, sometimes people think that I have the Midas touch because everything I touch turns to gold. He said they have it wrong. I only touch gold. And so what it meant for me, and what I really keep in mind, and as I, through the years, have gotten a bigger audience. And so in some cases, there could be somebody trying to make a connection with me where I have many people coming. It is nothing to do with how long that you've been in business or how many followers you have, where you are sincerely contributing something of value to your field, to the ecosystem, to your clients. By definition, your right partners, those that are also equals, they're just much more experienced equals, can be interested in your work when they really learn what it is that you're working on. And that is the point of connection, because otherwise it's just going to be a very unequal thing where you don't feel good as the person saying, please, famous influencer, would you build a relationship with me so it will build my platform? I mean, like, that doesn't feel good to them. It doesn't feel good to you. But if you see throughout the years that you're consistently working on things that are complementary and that you're, generous with them. Whenever Guy has a book coming out, or Dan, I love their work. When I love the work and it connects with my audience, I will share about it. I will write about it, because we're each contributing something important to the field. And so that's probably the biggest thing, I think, for people, is to really take your time and have patience, but also to not hesitate to really be asking for sometimes like connections like I had for Guy Kawasaki, or my current, really the last 15 years, I always talk about John Legend, the singer. I love John Legend. I love his work. I always talk about him. And little by little, I've been getting closer and closer through to his team and to, some potential ways to maybe finally connect. And what would be lovely was, would be eventually to do some work together.
Wow.
But have patience with the process. And I think balance, being very clear with who you're excited about and who you think is amazing, but to make sure that it's not just because they're famous or that they can do something for you. That's an example of that very transactional way of looking at something, and it doesn't feel good for the person you're reaching out to, and it is not empowering for you as well.
Wow. Pam, thanks so much for sharing that. I think your fifth book should be around in, connecting it and networking with the influencer, because the answer that you said, this always has been a topic many people wants to understand, but not a lot of people do it the right way. So sometimes so hurry, sometimes it's so not interest enough, sometimes it's just the wrong way of communication and things like that, and the manners also. So so if you can think about writing the fifth book around surrounding how to help people networking properly and expand it from the what is net into a section just for networking, that would also help a lot of business entrepreneurs out there to know what to do and best to grow their business up down.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I'll make sure to do it. It is really inherent in the method, right? I think a lot of it is, it's like when you begin to notice that you're very connected with the ecosystem surrounding your ideal client, you just begin to see people more frequently, right? You're more frequently going to be in contact with those companies or with those influencers. But I will make sure to, to continue to write about it and really just encourage people, to lean in and to make the ask, and then to have that good caring for your own heart, where it is okay if somebody doesn't respond, if they immediately reject you or shut down. That's sometimes part of the way that it is. Sometimes you're not meant to connect with that person, or sometimes you just need to have a little bit more patience and to find the opportunity in which things can happen. I appreciate how you reached out. We have not known each other before. We connected on LinkedIn. You were so gracious and personable the way you reached out in a message. We got to chat a little bit that way. And then now we have the opportunity to have this conversation. And so that's the way that it happens, in a very natural, organic way. So I appreciate you showing up, because now I didn't know at the time we first talked that I would end up having my first foreign translation of Vietnamese. So wonderful it is that we have this connection where now I know somebody who might be able to help me understand where would be good places in order to be, sharing the book.
Pam, so thank you so much for being so generous to accept my invitation to connect and then accept my invitation to talk today. And also, can you please tell Tanika that I really appreciate all of her support to make this happen also, okay?
100%. I will tell her. She is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of our audience, we would like to say thank you for you to join the show and share your story with us. There's a lot of things that you shared today. Definitely intrigued our, interest on re-looking back on what we do. So have some reflection time, and there's a lot of things that we can learn from experts like you. And definitely, if anyone out there that want to start looking for, to become a business owners, definitely I encourage them to looking for the books that you write so that they can expand their thinking and expand their ability to serve their clients. Pamela, thank you so much again, and we need to say goodbye for now. Anytime you come to our country, please let us know in advance so that we can have better preparation to welcome you in here. Okay.
Absolutely, I would love to. I'm way overdue. I have many clients in Asia, and I've never been even to the continent. So one of these days, don't be surprised. I will let you know when we're coming.
Thank you very much. You have a beautiful evening there, okay?
You too. Thank you.
Say hello to your
Bye-bye.
family for us. Thank you.
I will. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.